Hey there, parents. How you guys doing? Welcome to week 2 of Growing With. Just so glad you're being a part of this series by showing up and kind of committing to learning and growing. I think we really reflect what Christ wants us to do as Christians, not to become too static, but be dynamic as we continue to grow and learn and develop, and then consequently ask our youth, our children, to do this as well. We're in week 2, as I said, of Growing With, and I really encourage you. I think you'll be blessed by reading this book. I realize that you're probably way too busy. You don't have a lot of time, but I'd encourage you to take the 5, 10, 20 minutes, maybe it would take a week, to read the chapters in this book. You can obviously get it online, Kindle version or something like that for your tablet or phone or something. Read it while you're waiting for your son's soccer or daughter's ballet or whatever. But maybe you want to get the hard copy book. Could even be a discussion point outside of class. But this week in chapter 2, what I want to kind of focus on was kind of just a few things that I thought stood out from the chapter. Again, I don't have time to go over everything in the chapter, but hopefully these highlights will speak to you. First, it really talks on page 50 about cultivating relationships. And I think this is what I try to do as a youth director. Not just hold events, not just do things to do things, activity for the sake of activity, but that we could cultivate relationships with students, with our children, but then also really cultivate our relationship with God. And here's what I mean. This summer at our house, we had a garden. My wife Beth wanted to garden, and so I made a couple raised beds for her. I can kind of do some somewhat wood construction projects, and so made a couple raised beds, and then I went down to a place here in town called St. Louis Compost and got some raised bed mix. And so hopefully that's supposed to be like a really good soil. We let that settle in there. She went and purchased some plants and some seeds and everything she did, and she grew. We kind of lucked out. Some things were intentional with this growing, cultivating process. Where our house is the sun is in the morning, and so the front of our house is here, and it's kind of on the side, and so the sun comes up, and then in the afternoon, the front of our house is here, blocks the sun coming down in the afternoon, and so we're kind of blessed by not burning up the plants in the afternoon. But then we kind of lucked out too. Just by the grace of God, we had a bunch of rain this year. My wife Beth, she barely went out at all this year and watered. She only went out a couple times. We had some friends and neighbors who were on vacation during the really hot months, but for the most part, those of you who lived in St. Louis this year know that it rained a bunch. And so the same principle of cultivating those plants and the stuff in the garden we did this year is what we're really trying to do as parents with our children, is cultivate. And in the chapter, it says this on page 50. It says towards the bottom, it says, growing with parenting isn't about persevering the past or predicting the future, as much as it is about cultivating our relationships with our kids where they are in real time. And so the challenge is, what can you do today? Or what can you plan to do this week? Maybe not so much, what can you do in 10 years, 5 years, 3 years? Or what did you try to do in the past, but what can you do now? The chapter goes on to talk about how there's really 2 stages that typically the children and youth are talked about. And remember, I don't know if I said this last week or not, but if you go back just 100 years, 1900, 1920, there's really no such thing as a teenager. You basically grew up and you were working. And child labor laws, all these other things have really changed how America, education, going to school till you're at least 18, laws, all those kind of things really cultivated how and changed how life works. And so we talked about, it talks in the book about how adolescents, 13 to 18 years of age, and then we were kind of these emerging adults or young adults. And for years, a lot of you guys, that really went to about 22, maybe 24, 25, but now it really extends to 39, I would say even 35. Some people aren't getting married till middle 30s. Some of you may be happy about that as parents, have a young daughter. Other of you, that maybe are thinking about that 24-year-old son who's come back from college and doesn't have a job and is still downstairs playing video games all day. So you want them to grow up and emerge. But let's pause on that for now. Let's not accelerate your kids any further than we need to. But instead, let's focus on the stages that they talk about as parents, that we are cultivating these relationships. It talks about learners, explorers, and focusers. And the explorers and focusers really focusing on that young adult stage. But what I want us to think about this morning is the learner stage. What are we doing to help teach our children? And when the book talks about this, and I would agree, it's not so much teach like, let me tell you what to do, but how can we grow with, steal the copy of the title of the book, see what I did there, but grow with our children and learn and help teach them how to be a child of God and function in this world. And they paint some broad strokes. And so this is where you kind of need to read through the book. I encourage you, but I think there's enough content here for you guys to discuss this morning, is they talk about 5 ways to teach. It says, first, teaching invites and encourages, invites and endures practicing. Okay? So it's not just, let me do this for you. It's the aspect and the thought of like, let me not just fish for you and catch and give you a fish, but let me teach you how to fish. Okay? And so that a lot of time takes time. Okay? And it's going to go slower. Let me show you how I want you to vacuum the house. Okay? Or whatever skill you're trying to help teach them. It also trains specific skills. Our children, especially middle school, high school, are learning to do things that adults need to do. And there's a lot of stuff that you know how to do as an adult that you don't realize took you time to learn. And your child isn't going to learn it in one 30-second little teaching session. It's going to take time. The third thing it says is encourages reflection. So ask them, did they enjoy doing that? What didn't they enjoy? What did they learn? Sometimes kids think they know how to do things. They don't. Sometimes they might surprise you. They do. Fourth, it says teaching introduces choice. And that's really giving them, I'd say, controlled options, okay? Don't just give them, hey, what do you want to do for dinner? Say, here's the 2 or 3 things you have for dinner, or here's what we, might choose to do this evening or whatever, but give them those controlled options. And then finally, it fosters that collaboration. We know, for the most part, as a stereotype, as the older kids get, the less they're going to want to talk and interact with you. Part of that is intentional, and I think by God's design. And here's what I mean. It means that the more you and your kids are like best friends and get along and there's no tension and everything great, then there's no point for them becoming independent. There's no point in them growing up and getting their own family and moving on, because it's super nice and cozy, and if I just wait out mom and dad, they'll probably buy me whatever I want, and I broke my iPhone and they'll just go buy me a new one. I'm 27 and I'm still living in their basement, and why should I get a job? Because my parents keep providing for me. But the thought is, how do we grow with? How can we be teachers? I didn't even think about putting this in your notes. But if you know a teacher, here's a challenge for the week for you. If you know someone who teaches, ask them, especially grade school, middle school, ask them what's effective for them and what's changed in the last 5, 10, 20 years in teaching. Because there's some things that have really changed from when you and I have gone to school. And then the other thing that the beginning of the chapter talks about is it talks about photos. And so I think it'd be great for you this morning to talk about, just to start off, this little like icebreaker question. You have some photos displayed somewhere in your house. I'm pretty sure you do, or in your office or at work or someplace. What photos do you have? Do you have a favorite photo? Is there a favorite family photo or a favorite photo of your child that maybe you have on social media, something like that? But maybe start with that. Blessings to you as you go this week, growing with your children. I pray a blessing upon you, your family, and your children. God be with you this week. We'll see you next week.